Settle in, weary traveler. Let the fire's warmth embrace you. Let the shadows flicker against the walls, and let the world outside fade into the distance. Tonight, you are not just a listener, you are a wanderer stepping into the vast and ancient world of Norse mythology, a realm of gods and giants, of fate and prophecy, of creation and destruction. This is not just a story, it is a journey through time itself, a tale that stretches from the yawning void before existence to the twilight of the gods and beyond. A story whispered by the winds that sweep through the fjords, sung in the battle cries of warriors, and carried through the ages by the embers of old fires. Here, you will meet Odin, the All-Father, the seeker of wisdom who gave his eye to see beyond fate. You will stand beside Thor, the god of thunder, as he raises his mighty hammer to battle the endless forces of chaos. You will witness the cunning of Loki, the trickster, who weaves deception into the very fabric of the god's destiny. And you will follow Balder, the Shining One, as his fate marks the first steps toward Ragnarok, the end of all things. But do not be afraid. Though the world may tremble, though the stars may fall, this is a tale that has been told since time began, a cycle of endings and beginnings, where even the ashes of the old world will give rise to something new. So, let your mind drift, let your heart listen, and let the echoes of the past guide you forward. For this is the story of the Norse gods. And it all begins in the silence before the first spark of creation, before the world, before the heavens and the earth, before the gods themselves. There was only emptiness. A vast, yawning chasm known as Ginnungagap, stretching endlessly in all directions, neither warm nor cold, neither light nor dark. It was a place without time, without form, without meaning. To the north of this abyss lay Niflheim, a realm of shadow and frost, where the rivers of ice, known as the Elevagar, coiled and twisted, their currents flowing with venomous cold. To the south burned Muspelheim, a kingdom of raging fire, where unquenchable flames leapt into the void. And between them, only Ginnungagap, waiting for the first stirrings of creation. Over ages uncounted, the burning heat of Muspelheim met the frozen rivers of Niflheim, and where they touched, a mist began to rise. Slowly, over an eternity, the mist thickened, condensing into form, into flesh. The first being emerged from the icy, a towering, primeval giant known as Ymir, the progenitor of all the Jotnar, the frost giants. He was vast beyond comprehension, his breath thick with the cold of the void. He knew neither mother nor father, for he had sprung from the forces of chaos itself. As Ymir slept, sweat pooled from his vast form, and from his sweat, life began to take shape. From under his left arm, two beings were born, a male and a female, the ancestors of the giants. From his legs came another, six-headed and monstrous, the mightiest of his kin. And so the race of Jotnar began, roaming the void, untamed and unchecked. But Ymir was not alone in the new world. Deep within the frozen rivers of Niflheim, another form stirred. A great cow, Othumbla, born of the frost, nourished herself by licking the salty rime of the ice. Her milk flowed in great streams, and it was this milk that sustained Ymir, feeding the giant as he grew ever larger, his presence filling the void. As Othumbla licked the ice, something remarkable happened. A head emerged from within, then shoulders, then a body. Slowly, a being took shape, Buri, the first of the gods. Handsome and strong, he stood apart from the savage Jotnar. Buri had a son, Bor, who in time took for himself a wife, Bestla, daughter of the frost giants. Together, they bore 3 children, Odin, Vili, and Ve, the first of the Aesir gods, destined to shape the fate of all that would come. The 3 brothers grew in power, and soon they looked upon Ymir and his kin with growing unease. The Jotnar were wild, untamed, and cruel, their presence a lingering threat to any order that might be created. It was then that Odin and his brothers made a fateful decision. Ymir must die. A battle unlike any before it erupted in the formless void. The 3 gods struck against the great giant, and the struggle shook the very fabric of Ginnungagap. Ymir, massive beyond imagining, lashed out with all his fury, but the gods fought with purpose, with unity. In time they struck him down, and as his body fell, his lifeblood poured forth in an unstoppable torrent. The great flood drowned all but a few of his kin. Only one frost giant, Bergelmir, and his wife managed to escape, taking refuge on a lone outcrop, from which the Jotnar would one day rise again. With Ymir's body lying lifeless before them, Odin, Vili, and Ve turned to the task of creation. They took his massive corpse and shaped it into the world itself. His flesh became the land, his bones the mountains, his teeth the cliffs and crags. From his blood flowed the rivers and seas, stretching across the lands they had formed. His skull they raised high, creating the sky, held aloft by 4 mighty dwarves named Nordri, Sudri, Ostri, and Vestri, each standing at a cardinal point to support the heavens. From Ymir's hair, the gods wove the forests, and from his brain, they fashioned the clouds that drift across the sky. His great eyebrows, thick and strong, they laid at the edge of the world, forming a protective barrier, and within this boundary, they shaped a realm for men. Midgard, the world of humanity, set between the divine realm of Asgard and the chaotic lands of the Jotnar. But still, the world was dark. The brothers looked into Muspelheim, where the fires raged endlessly, and from its depths they took 2 mighty sparks. These they flung into the sky, where they became the sun and moon, casting their glow upon the new world. To guide them, the gods placed celestial beings in chariots, forever driving the sun and moon across the heavens, pursued by the wolves Skoll and Hati, who would one day catch them, bringing about the end of all things. With a world now shaped, the gods turned their eyes to the firmament, where they scattered the remnants of Ymir's bones, placing them as the stars in the night sky. And so, the cosmos took form, its realms divided, its lands given shape. But though the world was vast and beautiful, it remained empty. And Odin, the Allfather, gazed upon the new creation and knew that it was incomplete. It was time to bring forth life. Asgard had been secured, its walls standing tall against the threat of the Jotnar. But Odin, the Allfather, knew that strength alone would not be enough to rule the cosmos. The threads of fate were ever weaving, and only wisdom true, deep wisdom would allow him to understand the destiny of the gods and prevent the doom that loomed in the shadows. He had heard whispers of a sacred well, Mimis Brunner, hidden beneath the roots of the great world tree, Yggdrasil. This well, watched over by Mimir, the guardian of wisdom, held waters that contained the knowledge of all things past, present, and future. If Odin could drink from its depths, he would gain the insight needed to guide the gods and shape the fate of all existence. But knowledge comes at a price. Odin traveled to the roots of Yggdrasil, where Mimir, the ancient and wise, sat beside the well. The old guardian gazed upon Odin with knowing eyes and said, "This water is not for the unworthy. If you desire its wisdom, you must pay a great price." Odin did not hesitate. Without a word, he took his knife and plucked out his own eye, offering it to Mimir in exchange for a single sip of the well's water. His vision blurred, his head spun, but as soon as he drank, the mysteries of the universe unfolded before him. He saw the creation of the world and the fates of gods and men. He saw the coming of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, where all would be tested in the flames of destruction. Now half blind but infinitely wiser, Odin returned to Asgard. The gods marveled at his sacrifice, but Odin knew his search was far from over. The well had given him knowledge, but not control over fate. The runes, the ancient symbols of magic and destiny, remained beyond his grasp. If he was to truly command the future, he would have to suffer once more. Determined, Odin made his way back to Yggdrasil, the great ash tree that connected all realms. There he climbed its mighty branches and, without hesitation, plunged his own spear into his chest, hanging himself upon the tree. For 9 days and 9 nights he dangled between life and death, refusing food, refusing drink, refusing comfort. The winds howled, the branches creaked, and the ravens circled above, watching in silence. And then, as the dawn of the 9th day broke, Odin gazed into the abyss and saw the runes. They revealed themselves to him, their meanings etched into the fabric of the universe. In that moment, he understood their power, the ability to shape fate, to carve magic into the world, to control what was once uncontrollable. With newfound strength, Odin tore himself free from Yggdrasil, his body broken, but his spirit triumphant. The runes were now his to command, and with them he wove the first spells, teaching the gods and men the secrets of magic. He became the master of wisdom, the lord of prophecy, the All-Father in truth. But even as he returned to Asgard, his mind was troubled, for in his visions he had seen a darkness rising, 3 monstrous children, born of Loki, who would one day bring ruin to the gods. And so Odin prepared for the battles yet to come. The world had formed, the land was shaped, and the heavens stretched far above. But there was no life, no beings to walk Midgard, to speak, to build, to worship the gods who had forged the very earth beneath them. Odin, Vili, and Ve gazed upon their creation and saw that something was missing. As they wandered the newly formed land, they came upon a quiet shore where the waves lapped gently at the sands. There, lying upon the ground, were 2 fallen trees, their roots severed, their branches broken. One was an ash tree, tall and strong, the other an elm, slender and graceful. The gods looked upon these lifeless forms and saw potential. Odin reached out and breathed into them the gift of life. Vili granted them reason and thought, the ability to shape the world with mind and hand. Ve bestowed upon them sight, speech, and hearing, the senses needed to experience existence. Thus, from the lifeless wood, the first humans were born, Ask and Embla, the first man and woman. They rose from the sand, their eyes opening to the world for the first time, their hearts beating with the life gifted by the gods. Odin and his brothers looked upon them with satisfaction, for now Midgard had its inhabitants. But their task was not yet done. They built the first great hall of men, setting the foundation of civilization. The gods shaped the seasons and gave time its order, so that men would know when to plant and harvest. But Midgard was exposed, vulnerable to the dangers that lurked beyond its borders. The Jotnar, still bitter from Ymir slaying, roamed the edges of creation, their eyes filled with jealousy and hatred. Odin, foreseeing the dangers, took action. He and his brothers raised mighty defenses around Midgard, forming a great boundary from Ymir's eyebrows, creating a fortified realm for men. Now, humanity was safe for a time, but the gods had other matters to attend to. Their own home had yet to be built, a place from which they would rule and shape the destiny of all existence. And so the three brothers turned their gaze to the heavens, where the foundations of Asgard would be laid. The Aesir needed a realm befitting their power, separate from the mortal world, a place of divine splendor high above the lands of men. So they fashioned Bifrost, the great rainbow bridge, spanning the vast distances between Midgard and the heavens. This shimmering path, woven of light and magic, would serve as the only passage between the worlds, watched over by a vigilant guardian. In Asgard, the gods built mighty halls of stone and gold, each more resplendent than the last. The most magnificent of them all was Valaskjalf, Odin's seat, its walls gleaming silver, crowned by a great throne Lidskjalfrum, which he could see across all the realms. It was here, high above the world, that Odin and the Aesir would watch over creation. But the foundations of the cosmos were not yet stable. The balance between order and chaos had not yet been secured. The gods knew that to truly shape fate, they needed wisdom beyond their own understanding. And so, Odin began his quest for knowledge, a journey that would cost him dearly. With Midgard secured and humanity taking its first steps, the gods turned their attention to their own realm. They desired a kingdom above the world, a place of divine splendor from which they could rule the cosmos. So, with their might and wisdom, they raised Asgard, a realm of golden halls and towering walls, high above Midgard and linked only by the shimmering bridge known as Bifrost. The gods toiled for many ages, crafting their home from the finest stone and metal, drawing upon the raw forces of the cosmos. Each god took their place within this new world, shaping halls and strongholds to reflect their power. Odin's palace, Valaskjalf, gleamed with silver walls and a roof of gold, and at its heart stood Hlidskjalf, the high seat from which Odin could gaze upon all 9 realms. But Asgard was not yet complete. Though the gods had crafted a paradise, they had left it unguarded, vulnerable to the ever-present threat of the Jotnar. The frost giants, still vengeful from Ymir's fall, watched with envious eyes, longing to strike against the Aesir. Recognizing this danger, Odin and the gods resolved to build an impenetrable wall around Asgard, one that no enemy could breach. It was then that a mysterious builder arrived, offering to construct the wall in exchange for a hefty price, the hand of Freya, the goddess of beauty, along with the sun and the moon. The gods scoffed at the demand, but Loki, ever the trickster, proposed a bargain. The builder would have his reward only if he completed the wall in 1 winter, without the aid of any man. The builder agreed, and with his mighty stallion, Svadilfari, he set to work. As the days passed, the gods watched in alarm as the wall grew at an astonishing rate. Svadilfari, far more powerful than any normal horse, hauled massive stones effortlessly, aiding the builder beyond expectation. The gods realized that at this pace, the builder would succeed. Furious at the prospect of losing Freya, the sun, and the moon, they turned to Loki for a solution after all. It had been his idea. Loki, desperate to escape their wrath, devised a cunning plan. Transforming himself into a mare, he lured Svadilfari away into the wilderness, disrupting the builder's progress. When the final day arrived and the wall remained unfinished, the gods refused to pay his price. Enraged, the builder revealed his true nature was no mere man, but a Jotun, a frost giant in disguise. Before he could act, Thor raised his mighty hammer Mjolnir, and with a single blow shattered the giant's skull. The gods rejoiced, for Asgard was now protected by a mighty wall, and their enemies had been thwarted. But Loki's trickery had consequences. During his deception, he had become pregnant with a strange child. In time, he gave birth to an 8-legged steed, Sleipnir, the swiftest horse in all the realms. This unusual offspring he gifted to Odin, who rode Sleipnir across the skies and between worlds. Asgard now stood strong, its walls impenetrable, its halls gleaming with divine radiance. But Odin knew that might alone was not enough to secure the future. The gods needed wisdom, knowledge of fate and destiny, for the greatest battles had yet to come. And so, Odin set forth on a journey that would cost him dearly: search for the secrets of the universe.
Odin had foreseen the shadows creeping toward Asgard, a fate intertwined with the trickster god Loki. Though he was counted among the Aesir, Loki's nature was ever fluid, sometimes a friend, sometimes a foe. Yet it was not Loki himself who would bring the greatest danger to the gods, but his offspring, creatures of unimaginable power, destined to shape the end of days. Far beyond Asgard, in the land of the Jotnar, Loki had taken a giantess, Angrboda, as his consort. From their union came 3 terrible children, each more fearsome than the last. When Odin's gaze pierced through time and space, he saw what these creatures would become, and his heart grew heavy with dread. The first was Fenrir, a wolf of monstrous size, his black fur bristling like shadow, his jaws large enough to swallow the sun. Even as a pup, he grew at an unnatural rate, and the gods knew he would one day become a force of destruction. The second was Jormungandr, the great Midgard serpent, a creature so vast that he would one day encircle the entire world, biting his own tail. His venom could poison the very roots of Yggdrasil, and he would be the sworn enemy of Thor himself. The third was Hel, a being of dual nature, half living, half corpse. Her body was split, one side as fair as any goddess, the other blackened and rotting. She carried an air of death itself, and gazed upon all things with empty, knowing eyes. Fearing the prophecy of Ragnarok, Odin could not allow these children to roam free. He ordered the gods to seize them and cast them away, each to a fate befitting their nature. Fenrir, the great wolf, was brought to Asgard, where the gods attempted to raise him under their watchful eye. Only the war god, Tyr, dared to approach him, feeding him and growing close to the beast. But as Fenrir's strength grew, so did the gods' fear. Knowing he would soon be beyond their control, they devised a plan to bind him. Twice they tried to restrain him with mighty chains, and twice he shattered them with ease. Desperate, Odin sought aid from the dwarves, who wove a magical ribbon known as Gleipnir light as silk, yet unbreakable, forged from the whispers of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, and the breath of a fish. The gods lured Fenrir to a distant land and challenged him to test his strength against this delicate-looking bond. But the wolf, sensing trickery, refused to be bound unless one of the gods placed a hand in his mouth as a gesture of trust. Tyr, the bravest among them, stepped forward, placing his hand between Fenrir's jaws. When the wolf realized he had been deceived, he bit down, severing Tyr's hand at the wrist. Bound and raging, Fenrir was left chained until the day of Ragnarok, when he would finally break free. Jormungandr, the great serpent, was cast into the sea that surrounded Midgard. There he grew to a size beyond imagining, his coils stretching from one end of the world to the other. He would become Thor's mortal enemy, fated to battle the thunder god in the final war. Hel, deemed too powerful to roam free, was given dominion over the dead. Odin cast her into the dark and misty realm beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, where she built her throne in Niflheim. From there, she ruled over those who died of sickness, age, and misfortune. Her realm a cold, shadowed place, known simply as Helheim. With Loki's children scattered across the realms, Odin hoped that the worst had been prevented, but fate had already been set into motion. Loki's lineage had been woven into the destiny of the gods, and no chains nor distances could keep Ragnarok at bay forever. And so, the gods turned their eyes to another threat not born of Loki, but of vengeance and fire. For in the lands of Muspelheim, a giant with a burning sword was stirring, and one day he would set the world aflame.
Odin had foreseen the shadows creeping toward Asgard, a fate intertwined with the trickster god, Loki. Though he was counted among the Aesir, Loki's nature was ever fluid, sometimes a friend, sometimes a foe. Yet it was not Loki himself who would bring the greatest danger to the gods, but his offspring, creatures of unimaginable power, destined to shape the end of days. Far beyond Asgard, in the land of the Jötnar, Loki had taken a giantess, Angrboda, as his consort. From their union came 3 terrible children, each more fearsome than the last. When Odin's gaze pierced through time and space, he saw what these creatures would become, and his heart grew heavy with dread. The first was Fenrir, a wolf of monstrous size, his black fur bristling like shadow, his jaws large enough to swallow the sun. Even as a pup, he grew at an unnatural rate, and the gods knew he would one day become a force of destruction. The second was Jormungandr, the great Midgard serpent, a creature so vast that he would one day encircle the entire world, biting his own tail. His venom could poison the very roots of Yggdrasil, and he would be the sworn enemy of Thor himself. The third was Hel, a being of dual nature, half living, half corpse. Her body was split, one side as fair as any goddess, the other blackened and rotting. She carried an air of death itself, and gazed upon all things with empty, knowing eyes. Fearing the prophecy of Ragnarok, Odin could not allow these children to roam free. He ordered the gods to seize them and cast them away, each to a fate befitting their nature. Fenrir, the great wolf, was brought to Asgard, where the gods attempted to raise him under their watchful eye. Only the war god Tyr dared to approach him, feeding him and growing close to the beast. But as Fenrir's strength grew, so did the gods' fear. Knowing he would soon be beyond their control, they devised a plan to bind him. Twice they tried to restrain him with mighty chains, and twice he shattered them with ease. Desperate, Odin sought aid from the dwarves, who wove a magical ribbon known as Gleipnirlight, as silk, yet unbreakable, forged from the whispers of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, and the breath of a fish. The gods lured Fenrir to a distant land and challenged him to test his strength against this delicate-looking bond. But the wolf, sensing trickery, refused to be bound unless one of the gods placed a hand in his mouth as a gesture of trust. Tyr, the bravest among them, stepped forward, placing his hand between Fenrir's jaws. When the wolf realized he had been deceived, he bit down, severing Tyr's hand at the wrist. Bound and raging, Fenrir was left chained until the day of Ragnarok, when he would finally break free. Jormungandr, the great serpent, was cast into the sea that surrounded Midgard. There, he grew to a size beyond imagining, his coils stretching from one end of the world to the other. He would become Thor's mortal enemy, fated to battle the thunder god in the final war. Hel, deemed too powerful to roam free, was given dominion over the dead. Odin cast her into the dark and misty realm beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, where she built her throne in Niflheim. From there, she ruled over those who died of sickness, age, and misfortune. Her realm a cold, shadowed place known simply as Helheim. With Loki's children scattered across the realms, Odin hoped that the worst had been prevented, but fate had already been set into motion. Loki's lineage had been woven into the destiny of the gods, and no chains nor distances could keep Ragnarok at bay forever. And so, the gods turned their eyes to another threat, not born of Loki, but of vengeance and fire. For in the lands of Muspelheim, a giant with a burning sword was stirring, and one day he would set the world aflame. While the gods contended with the children of Loki, another ancient force stirred beyond their sight, biding its time in the smoldering depths of Muspelheim. This was the land of fire, a realm untouched by cold or darkness, where flames danced eternally, and molten rivers carved paths through blackened rock. At its heart stood Surtur, the mightiest of the fire giants, his form wreathed in flames, his grip tight around the hilt of his colossal sword blade that burned with the fury of the cosmos. Surtur was not like the other giants. While the Jotnar of Jotunheim schemed and warred against the Aesir in vain attempts to reclaim power, Surtur did not seek conquest. His purpose was foretold long before the first gods walked the land, woven into the fate of the cosmos itself. When the end of days arrived, when Ragnarok came, Surtur would rise from Muspelheim, cross the Bifrost, and set the world ablaze. Odin had seen this vision in the waters of Mimir's well, and it haunted him. He knew that Surtur could not be reasoned with, nor could he be bound like Fenrir. His flames would consume Asgard, Midgard, and all the 9 realms, reducing everything to embers before the cycle of existence began anew. But even armed with this knowledge, the Allfather could do little. Muspelheim was beyond the gods' reach, its flames unwelcoming to any but its own kin. Surtur's time had not yet come out, but the gods knew it would, and they could only prepare. Despite this looming fate, Asgard continued to prosper, and the gods grew in power. Odin's thirst for knowledge did not abate, and he continued to seek wisdom, sending his 2 ravens, Hugin and Munin, across the world each day to gather news of all that transpired. His watchful eye extended to Midgard, where mankind flourished under the gods' protection, and to Jotunheim, where the giants still plotted their revenge. But amid this fragile peace, Loki's mischief had not yet ceased. Though his children had been cast to their fates, he remained in Asgard, his silver tongue ever weaving between truth and deception. He played at being an ally, yet his heart belonged to no one. He amused himself with trickery, his laughter ringing through the halls of the gods. But even as he jested, the seeds of chaos grew within him, waiting for the moment they would bloom into destruction. For now, however, the gods turned their thoughts towards celebration. A great feast was called in Aegir's Hall, the domain of the sea giant Aegir, where golden ale flowed endlessly, and the gods reveled in their strength and glory. It was here that Loki's greatest betrayal would begin, and it was here that the Aesir would unknowingly set the final pieces of Ragnarok into place. As the fires of Muspelheim burned ever hotter, Surtur's sword gleamed in the darkness. He did not move, he did not speak, but he knew his time would come. In the great halls of Aegir, beneath the waves of the endless sea, the gods gathered for a grand feast. Aegir, the mighty sea giant, had brewed ale in massive cauldrons, filling the hall with golden drink that never ran dry. The gods laughed, their voices echoing through the coral-carved halls, as they celebrated their strength, their victories, and their place in the cosmos. But among them sat Loki, his smile sharp as a dagger, his mind restless with schemes. He had long played the role of trickster, a jester among gods, but he had grown resentful of their scorn. Though he had once walked as their brother, a seed of bitterness had taken root within him, and that night, in the glow of the feast fires, it would bloom into ruin. At first, his words were laced with honey, his jests drawing laughter from Thor, from Frey, from Heimdall. But as the night deepened, his tongue turned sharp. One by one he insulted the gods, unraveling old wounds with carefully chosen words. He mocked Freya's beauty, calling it a veil for her countless lovers. He sneered at Odin, calling him a coward who sacrificed his eye for knowledge, yet still feared his fate. He scorned Thor's might, saying his strength was nothing without his hammer. The hall grew silent. The gods, long used to Loki's tricks, now saw something darker in his eyes, some malice they had never feared before. Tyr rose, handless but undaunted, demanding Loki hold his tongue. But the trickster only laughed, reminding Tyr of his lost hand, severed in deception. Then his gaze turned to Balder, the shining god of light, beloved by all. Loki's smile faded, his voice lowering to a whisper. What will you do, fair Balder, when the shadows come for you? A chill settled over the feast. The gods did not know then that these words were more than jest, they were prophecy. For Loki had already set into motion events that would lead to Balder's death, the first tragedy that would signal the coming of Ragnarok. Furious at his insolence, Thor stood, raising Mjolnir, ready to strike the trickster down. But before the hammer could fall, Loki turned and fled, vanishing into the night. He knew he could no longer remain among the Aesir, for his path had been set. From that night on, Loki became their enemy. He would run, he would hide, but in the end, the gods would find him. And when they did, the punishment they wrought upon him would echo through time until the day of reckoning arrived. As the gods sat in uneasy silence, the feast now spoiled, a shadow passed through the halls of Asgard. Ragnarok had begun. The gods of Asgard had long lived in the light of Balder, the shining god, fairest and kindest among them. His presence was like the golden dawn, bringing joy to gods and men alike. His mother Frigg loved him above all else and feared for his safety, for she had seen omens of his doom. The shadows of fate whispered of a day when her son would fall, and the gods would weep, powerless to save him. Desperate to prevent this tragedy, Frigg traveled across the 9 realms, extracting a sacred oath from all things that they would never harm Balder. She spoke with fire and water, stone and metal, beast and man, plant and weapon, and each swore upon its essence that it would never bring harm to the shining god. With this vow secured, Asgard rejoiced, believing Balder to be invincible. And so, the gods turned his invulnerability into sport. They would hurl spears, stones, and arrows at him, laughing as each weapon bounced harmlessly off his skin. The halls of Asgard rang with mirth, for they believed they had cheated fate itself. But Loki, ever cunning, had watched. He knew that fate could not be denied, only delayed. Disguising himself as an old woman, he approached Frigg and spoke to her in a voice of sorrow. You have made your son untouchable, great queen, but is there truly nothing that can harm him? Frigg, thinking the old woman harmless, sighed. All things swore the oath, save one. The mistletoe was too young, too weak to be feared. It alone made no promise. Loki's eyes gleamed with malice. Silently, he slipped away and found the mistletoe growing in the forests of Midgard. He plucked a single branch and sharpened it into a dart, whispering words of mischief into its pale bark. Then he returned to the halls of the gods, where the game of hurling weapons at Balder continued. Among the gathered gods stood Hother, Balder's blind brother, who did not partake in the sport, for he could not see to throw. Loki approached him, placing the mistletoe dart in his hands. Come, brother of Balder, he whispered. Let me guide your hand, so that you too may honor him. Hother, unaware of the trick, nodded and threw the dart. The laughter of the gods turned to horror. The mistletoe flew swift and silent, striking Balder in the heart. His radiant eyes widened as he staggered, the light dimming from his form. A single breath escaped his lips before he fell to the ground, lifeless. A great cry arose in Asgard, shaking the halls of the gods. Frigg collapsed in despair, and Odin's face darkened, for he knew that this was the first true sign of Ragnarok. Balder, the god of light and purity, had been slain. The world would never shine as brightly again. The gods seized Hother, but their fury was mixed with sorrow, for they knew he had been but a pawn. And Loki, the true architect of this crime, had vanished into the night. Desperate to undo this tragedy, Frigg begged for Balder's return. Odin, wise in the ways of fate, sent Hermod, the swiftest of the gods, down to Helheim, the realm of the dead, to plead with Hel herself for Balder's release. But the Queen of the Dead did not bargain easily. She would allow Balder to return, but only if all things in the world wept for him. The gods spread across the 9 realms, asking every creature, every stone, every tree to shed a tear for the fallen god. And all did, save one. An old giantess, cold and unmoved, refused to weep, saying, "Let Hel keep what is hers." But this was no mere giantess, it was Loki in disguise. And so, Balder remained in the underworld, trapped beyond the reach of gods and men. His death had sealed the fate of all, for now the gods knew. Ragnarok was coming, and even their greatest efforts could not turn it aside. Balder's death had cast a shadow over Asgard. The golden halls, once filled with laughter, now echoed with sorrow. The gods mourned, but their grief soon turned to wrath. Loki had caused this, and for his crime, there could be no forgiveness. Odin, his single eye burning with fury, called for Loki's capture. The gods scoured the realms, hunting the trickster who had once walked among them as kin. But Loki was cunning, shifting forms, slipping through the cracks between worlds. He fled to the mountains, where he built himself a home upon a high peak, watching the gods search below. Still, he was not satisfied to remain hidden. He ventured out in disguise, reveling in the chaos he had sown. But the gods, wise in his ways, set a trap. They sent Thor, whose wrath burned hotter than any flame, to search every valley, every cave, every fjord. And at last, they found Loki by the shores of a great river. Loki saw them approach, and with a final act of trickery, leapt into the waters, transforming into a salmon to escape their grasp. But the gods were ready. Kvasir, the wisest among them, foresaw his move and guided Thor to cast a great net. The river churned as Loki twisted and fought, but the net closed around him. In a final attempt, he leapt high, almost clearing the trap, but Thor, quick as lightning, caught him by the tail and wrenched him from the water. Bound and furious, Loki was dragged back to Asgard, where the gods prepared his punishment. No simple death would suffice, for the crime he had committed was greater than any before. Instead, they sought a fate more fatiguing torment that would last until the end of time. They took him deep beneath the earth, into the darkest caverns, where no light could reach. There, they bound him to 3 great stones with unbreakable chains, forged by Odin's own hand. But the gods did not stop there. They took a great serpent and hung it above him, its fangs dripping with venom. From that moment on, the snake would release its poison drop by drop, burning Loki's flesh with each fall. His screams would shake the caverns, filling the underworld with his agony. But Loki was not alone. His faithful wife, Sigyn, refused to abandon him. She took a bowl and held it above his face, catching the venom before it could touch him. For years, she remained by his side, her hands steady, her love unbroken. Yet even Sigyn could not hold the bowl forever. When it filled, she would turn to empty it. And in that moment, the venom would strike. Loki's body would writhe, his cries would shake the earth, and the mountains themselves would tremble. And so, bound in darkness, Loki remained, his mind filled with hatred, his heart burning with vengeance. But he would not remain there forever. The gods believed they had won, that they had silenced their traitor. But in truth, they had only delayed the inevitable. For Loki's fate was tied to Ragnarok, and when that final battle came, the bonds would break, the earth would shatter, and he would rise again. And when he did, all the realms would burn. Though Loki was bound beneath the earth, his influence had not yet faded. The gods had secured vengeance for Baldur's death, but the balance of the 9 realms had begun to shift. The war of fate, the final reckoning that Odin had long feared, was creeping ever closer. Beyond the golden halls of Asgard, the fires of conflict burned. Old rivalries reignited, and ancient feuds were rekindled. In Jotunheim, the frost giants stirred, restless and filled with hatred for the Aesir, vowing vengeance for Ymir's fall and Loki's imprisonment. Their king, Thrym, gathered his warriors, their icy weapons gleaming beneath the northern lights, preparing for the day they would march upon Asgard. But they were not the only ones sharpening their blades. In Svartalfheim, the dwarves worked tirelessly beneath the mountains, crafting weapons of unfathomable power. They too had seen the signs Ragnarok was approaching, and they sought to arm themselves before the final battle began. Their forges roared, their anvils rang like war drums, as they fashioned tools of destruction and defense alike. In Midgard, the world of men, kingdoms rose and fell with the passing of seasons. Wars were waged, alliances shattered, and the echoes of their battles reached the ears of the gods. The mortals, unaware of their part in the grand design, fought as though their struggles alone shaped the world. Yet they, too, were but threads in the great tapestry of fate, woven into the destiny of Ragnarok. Meanwhile, in Muspelheim, Surtur's flames burned ever brighter. The fire giant, the destined bringer of destruction, stood at the edge of his realm, his massive sword burning like a piece of the sun itself. He did not move, nor did he strike, for his time had not yet come. But his presence alone sent ripples through the cosmos, a reminder that the end was written, and none could escape it. The gods of Asgard, sensing the unrest, sought to prepare for the storm ahead. Odin sat upon his throne in Valaskjalf, peering into the depths of time, seeking answers in the shifting patterns of fate. But even he, the wisest of the gods, could not see the full picture. Ragnarok was coming, but the precise moment remained shrouded in mystery. Thor, the protector of Asgard, grew restless. His hammer, Mjolnir, thirsted for battle, and he longed to strike against the giants before they could mount their attack. But Odin, ever cautious, forbade him from acting too soon. The gods had bound their enemies with fragile threads, and any hasty move could unravel the balance entirely. Still, Thor's impatience could not be contained forever. The war between the realms was not a matter of if, but when. And when the first strike was made, there would be no stopping the flood of blood and fire that followed. And so, the gods waited, watched, and prepared. Yet even as they steeled themselves for war, whispers moved through the shadows, whispers of a traitor, whispers of a god long thought defeated, whispers of Loki's revenge. For deep beneath the earth, in the darkness of his prison, Loki's hatred had festered. His body writhed with torment, but his mind remained sharp, and he knew when the time was right, When the chains broke, when the venom ceased to fall, he would rise, and he would bring ruin with him. Bound beneath the earth, writhing in agony, Loki endured his punishment. The venom of the great serpent above dripped onto his flesh, sending searing pain through his body. His wife Sigyn remained by his side, catching the poison in a bowl to spare him his suffering. Yet each time she turned to empty it, a single drop would fall, and Loki's screams would shake the very foundations of the world. Ages passed in torment, his rage festering like a wound that refused to heal. He had once laughed among the gods, but they had cast him aside, fearing what he had become. They believed they had silenced him. They were wrong, for fate is not so easily denied. The ground trembled, the air grew heavy, and across the 9 realms, a shift in destiny could be felt. The bindings that held Loki, forged by Odin's own magic, began to weaken. The power that had kept him prisoner for so long was unraveling, fraying like an old thread. And then they snapped. With a roar that echoed through the underworld, Loki tore free. He rose from the shadows, his body still scarred from the centuries of torment, but his mind burning with vengeance. He had not forgotten. He had not forgiven. The gods had stolen his place, had cast his children into exile, had bound him in suffering. But now he was free. And now Ragnarok would begin. The earth shook as Loki stepped forward, his form shifting, his laughter carrying on the wind like a storm approaching. He would not wage this war alone. His children Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Hel would stand beside him, along with every enemy the gods had ever made. From the depths of Helheim, the gates creaked open, and the dead stirred. The dishonored, the restless, those who had died outside the halls of Valhalla rose at Loki's command. An army of shadows, countless and unstoppable, began their march. From the great seas, Jormungandr, the world serpent, uncoiled his massive form, rising from the waters that had long concealed him. His eyes burned like twin suns, and with a single motion, he set the oceans to rage, sending towering waves crashing against the shores of Midgard. And in the darkened forests, Fenrir, the great wolf, at last snapped his jaws free from his bonds. He lifted his head and howled, a sound that sent fear through even the mightiest of gods. With each step, the earth trembled beneath him, his hunger unquenchable, his fate written in prophecy. The gods had believed they had won. They had believed they had sealed their fate. But now, as the sky darkened and the air filled with the scent of war, they knew the truth. Ragnarok had begun. The final war of the gods was upon them, and not even Odin's wisdom could prevent what was to come. The gates of Helheim yawned open, and the legions of the dead poured forth like a river of shadows. The dishonored souls, those who had died in sickness, in cowardice, or without glory now, found purpose in their master's call. Loki stood at the head of the march, his eyes burning with vengeance, his laughter lost in the howling wind. Beside him walked his daughter Hel, the queen of the underworld. Her cold gaze swept over her risen army, half of her face still and serene, the other a rotted husk of death itself. At her silent command, the dead marched faster, their hollow eyes fixed upon Asgard. The 9 realms trembled as Loki's forces rose from every corner of existence. From the east, the Jotnar of Jotunheim stormed forth, their weapons of ice and stone gleaming in the pale light. Their hatred for the Aesir burned bright, fueled by ages of enmity. Thrym, their king, roared for blood, vowing that this time the halls of Odin would fall beneath their might. From the depths of the sea, the great serpent Jormungandr uncoiled, his endless body sending waves surging across Midgard. The world groaned as his tail finally came loose from his maw. His long wait was over. He would face his nemesis Thor and fulfill the prophecy of their destined battle. And in the heart of the world, Fenrir ran free. No chain held him now. No god could bind him again. His paws crushed the land beneath him, and with every breath, his hunger grew. He would devour all in his path. Then came the fire. The sky ignited as the warriors of Muspelheim marched forth, their bodies wreathed in flames, their swords forged from the heart of the sun itself. And at their head strode Surtur, his flaming sword held high. The end had come, and it would be his fire that would consume the world. As the armies of destruction converged upon Asgard, the gods knew there was no escape. Odin sat upon his throne, his ravens whispering the doom he had long foreseen. His warriors, the Einherjar, stood ready in Valhalla, gripping their blades with grim determination. "This is the end," Odin murmured, but his voice was steady. He had seen his fate. He had accepted it. Then the war horn Gjallarhorn sounded across the sky, its deafening call shaking the roots of Yggdrasil. The final battle had begun. The gods donned their armor. Thor grasped Mjolnir, his hammer crackling with thunder. Freyr took up his blade, though he knew it would not be enough. Heimdall, ever watchful, prepared for his duel with Loki. And Odin, father of all, rode forth on Sleipnir, leading his warriors into battle for the last time. The skies blackened, the earth cracked, the sea churned, and Ragnarok consumed the world. The sky burned, the earth trembled, the seas raged. The war to end all wars had begun. From the east, the frost giants of Jotunheim poured forth, their colossal forms blotting out the sun. At their head, Thrym, their king, bellowed for vengeance, his massive axe gleaming with ice. The ground cracked beneath their march, and with every step, winter's breath followed, chilling the air and darkening the sky. From the south, the fire giants of Muspelheim advanced, led by Surtur, the bringer of flames. His sword, a blade of pure fire, blazed brighter than the sun, and with a single swing, he cleaved the Bifrost in half, shattering the bridge between the realms. The gods were now trapped there, would be no retreat. The forces of Helheim came next, an endless tide of the dead, their hollow eyes fixed upon the halls of Asgard. Loki stood at their front, his expression twisted in triumph, his laughter lost in the roar of battle. Hel, his daughter, watched silently, knowing her time had come. The gods answered the call. Odin, mounted on Sleipnir, rode forth, spear in hand, leading the Einherjar, the honored dead of Valhalla. Their shields shone like stars, their swords sang with fury. They were the greatest warriors to have ever lived, and they would fight until the last. Thor, god of thunder, charged forward, Mjolnir crackling with lightning in his grasp. His eyes burned with rage as he sought his ancient foe Jörmungandr, the world serpent who towered over the battlefield, his massive coils shaking the earth. Tyr, the god of war, raised his sword high, preparing to meet Garm, the monstrous wolf of Helheim, whose howls foretold destruction. Their battle would shake the roots of Yggdrasil itself. Heimdall, ever watchful, stood at the gates, waiting for Loki, his destined enemy. They had long been opposites, Zone, the guardian of Asgard, the other, its greatest betrayer. Now, their fates would be decided in steel and blood. And then Fenrir came. The monstrous wolf, freed from his chains, ran with terrifying speed toward Odin. The Allfather met him head-on, spear in hand, but fate could not be denied. With a single deafening snap of his jaws, Fenrir swallowed Odin whole. The All-Father, the wisest of gods, the ruler of Asgard, was gone. A cry of fury erupted from the battlefield. Vidar, Odin's silent son, rushed forward. He had long waited for this moment, knowing what must be done. With one foot, he pressed down upon Fenrir's lower jaw, holding it open, and with his sword, he tore the beast's throat asunder. The wolf fell, its great body shuddering, but the damage had been done. Odin was dead. Across the battlefield, Thor at last met Jormungandr. The world serpent struck first, lunging forward with his fangs bared, but Thor countered, swinging Mjolnir with all his might. The impact sent shockwaves through the cosmos, cracking the heavens apart. Again and again, the god of thunder struck, and with one final blow, he shattered the serpent's skull. But the victory was short-lived. Jormungandr had already loosed his venom, and it coursed through Thor's veins like wildfire. Staggering, the god of thunder took 9 steps before he fell lifeless upon the battlefield. The battle raged on. The gods fell, one by one, as the forces of chaos surged forward. Frey, the god of fertility, stood against Surtur, but without his blade, he was powerless. With a single swing of his burning sword, Surtur cut Frey down, his body reduced to embers. Loki and Heimdall met at last, their fates intertwined. The trickster lunged, twin daggers flashing, but Heimdall was faster. They struck as own blade against blade, flesh against flesh, and in the end, both fell, their lifeblood mixing upon the broken earth. Asgard burned, the gods lay slain, the world was consumed by flame, and then Surtur raised his sword one final time. With a sweep of his fiery blade, he set the 9 realms ablaze. Fire roared through the sky, engulfing everything in its path. The seas boiled, the mountains crumbled. The great tree, Yggdrasil, shuddered, its roots scorched, its branches consumed in flames. The end had come. The gods, the giants, the dead, the living, all were swallowed by the inferno. The cosmos collapsed into darkness. The fire burned everything. The 9 realms, once teeming with life, were now nothing but smoldering ruins. The ocean had swallowed the land, the sky had crumbled, and even the great Yggdrasil, the world tree, had trembled in its final moments. But from the ashes, the embers of existence still glowed. For Ragnarok was not just the end, it was also the beginning. A great silence fell upon the cosmos, a void where once there had been war. The old world had perished in the flames, but beneath the destruction, something new began to stir. The waters receded, revealing fresh land, untouched by the battles of gods and giants. The air, once thick with smoke, cleared, and a new sun rose in the sky, born from the remnants of the old. In this new dawn, a few survivors remained. Vidar, the silent avenger, had endured. He had avenged his father, Odin, by slaying Fenrir, and now he stood upon the new land, watching as the world was reborn. Vali, another son of Odin, had survived the destruction as well, untouched by the chaos, destined to help shape the future. From the battle's ruin, Magni and Modi, the sons of Thor, emerged. In their hands they carried Mjolnir, their father's mighty hammer, an artifact of the old world that would now be used to build the new. But they were not alone. In the distance, beyond the burnt ruins of Asgard, Heather and Balderonsay, enemies in fate, returned from the depths of Helheim. Death had not held them forever, and now, in this new age, they would walk the land as brothers, free from the curse that had driven them apart. And far from the eyes of gods and giants, two figures stirred within the depths of Holt, the sacred forest that had been untouched by the flames of Ragnarok. They were Lif and Lifthrasir, the last humans. Hidden from destruction, they had survived by drinking the morning dew, their bodies shielded by the great trees. As they stepped forth into the light of the new world, they beheld a land free of war, untouched by the conflicts of the past. They would be the first of the new people, the ancestors of all who would come after. The cycle had begun again. High above, the sky shimmered with the light of a new Sunsol's daughter, born to take her mother's place. And beyond the reaches of the world, Yggdrasil stood, though scarred. From its ancient roots, life would return. The prophecies had spoken truly. The gods had fallen. The old world had perished. But from its destruction, something new had emerged, a world of peace, light, and renewal. The age of men would begin once more. And so, the great tale of the Norse gods had ended not in despair, but in rebirth. For even in death, there is always the promise of a new beginning. As the world was reborn, so too was humanity. But unlike the gods, whose destiny had been shaped by prophecy, mankind's future was unwritten. Only two humans had survived Ragnarok and Lifthrasir, a man and a woman who had hidden deep within the sacred forest of Holt. Sheltered from the fires of Surtur and the destruction of the realms, they had lived on nothing but morning dew, untouched by the chaos above. When the flames faded and the earth was renewed, they stepped forward, walking upon the fresh soil of a new world. They were alone. Midgard, once a land of countless tribes, great halls and fierce warriors, had been wiped clean. No cities remained, no kings ruled, no great battles were waged. But the land was fertile, untouched by war, a place where life could begin again. Lif and Lifthrasir wandered this empty world, seeking shelter, seeking signs of what had once been. The forests were thick with ancient trees, untouched by the axe of man. Rivers flowed with clear water, unspoiled by blood. The mountains stood high, watching in silence, as they always had. But were they truly alone? As they walked, they felt Ita presence, unseen but familiar. It was as if the old gods still lingered in the whisper of the trees, in the rush of the rivers, in the warmth of the rising sun. They did not see Odin, nor Thor, nor Freya, but their spirits had not faded completely. The world was different, but their essence remained woven into the land itself. And so, Lif and Lifthrasir began to build. They shaped their first home with their own hands, carving from the earth, learning from the land. They had no written laws, no rulers, no great warriors to guide them, only the will to survive, to create, to rebuild. With time, their children would spread across the world, forming new clans, new stories, new myths. The names of the old gods would fade, spoken only in whispers, passed down through generations as echoes of a world long gone. But even as ages passed, the cycle would never truly end. For the world had been reborn, and with it, the spirit of the gods. And one day, in a future yet unseen, new gods would rise, and new sagas would be written. The cycle of creation, destruction, and rebirth would continue, as it always had, and as it always would. The battle had ended. The flames had burned away the old world, and silence fell over the 9 realms. Yet even in this new dawn, remnants of the past still lingered, echoing through time like whispers carried on the wind. Vidar, Vali, Magni, and Modi stood upon the newborn land, staring at the quiet sky, knowing that they had inherited a world forever changed. The golden halls of Asgard were gone, reduced to dust and memory. The rivers that once flowed through Midgard now traced different paths, carving a landscape unknown to gods or men. And Yggdrasil, though it still stood, bore deep scars from Ragnarok's fury. But something else lingered, a feeling, a presence, as if the old gods had not entirely vanished. Vidar, the Silent One, turned his gaze to the heavens. He had avenged Odin, but what now? He was a god of vengeance, yet his purpose had been fulfilled. He wandered the empty plains, listening for the voice of his father, but none came. Only the rustling of the wind and the murmurs of the growing world remained. Deep within the forests, Magni and Modi walked the new earth, gripping Mjolnir as if it were a relic from a time long lost. They felt their father's power still humming through the hammer, as if Thor's spirit lived on within it. They knew that thunder would return to the skies one day, but when and how remained a mystery. And then there was Balder. Returned from Helheim, freed from death's grasp, Balder walked among his surviving kin, feeling as if he had stepped into a dream. He had died once, a victim of fate and trickery. But now, he was alive. His brother, Huther, stood beside him, no longer blinded by Loki's schemes. They had been enemies in prophecy, but now they were only brothers, bound by the weight of an age that had ended. Yet Balder felt something else. He pulled toward the past, as if the spirits of the slain gods were not truly gone. One night, as he stood beneath the vast sky, gazing at the new stars that burned in place of the old, he heard a whisper in the wind. It was not Odin, nor Thor, nor any voice he had known in life. It was fate itself, speaking to him through the fabric of time. The past was not gone. It could never be gone, for the gods, like the world, would always return in one form or another. Balder looked to the horizon, where the first humans, Lif and Lifthrasur, built their first home in the new world. He knew then that the cycle had not ended, it had merely turned a new page, a page that had yet to be written. Not all gods had fallen in the final battle. Though Asgard had crumbled and many of its greatest warriors had perished, there were those who had vanished before the flames consumed the old world. They had not stood upon the battlefield, nor had they taken their place in prophecy. Some had hidden, some had fled, and some had simply been forgotten. As the new world took shape, whispers of these lost gods drifted through the forests and mountains, carried on the winds that still bore the memory of Ragnarok. One such god was Huther, the blind son of Odin, who had once slain Balder under Loki's deceit. When Ragnarok came, he had been trapped in the cold depths of Helheim, unable to fight, unable to change his fate. But after the world burned and Balder returned, so too did Huther, stepping onto the new land beside his brother, no longer cursed by his past. But others remained missing. There were gods of old magic, beings whose names had been spoken in secret, those who had never sought war. Some had disappeared into the shadows of Yggdrasil before Ragnarok, evading fate itself. Their power had not been tied to battle, and so they had neither fallen nor been remembered. Among them were the Vanir, the gods of nature and prophecy. Njord, the sea god, had long returned to his realm, far from the fires of war. His children, Freya and Frey, had played their parts in the great conflict, but whispers suggested that somewhere, hidden deep within the waves or the forests, remnants of the Vanir still walked, untouched by Ragnarok's doom. And then there was Idun, the keeper of the golden apples, the goddess of eternal youth. In the old world, her fruit had kept the gods immortal, sustaining their strength. But as the final war approached, she had vanished, and with her, the last of the apples. Some believed she had perished when the flames devoured the realms. Others believed she had fled to the farthest edges of existence, beyond the reach of prophecy itself. If she still lived, then somewhere in the new world, the secret of immortality remained. And what of Loki? He had fallen in battle, slain by Heimdall in the chaos of Ragnarok. But Loki had never been bound by the same rules as the other gods. He was a trickster, a shapeshifter, a weaver of fate's loose threads. Could it be that some part of him still existed, hidden in the cracks between worlds? Vidar, silent and watchful, often wandered the new land alone, listening for the echoes of what once was. He knew that just because something had been lost did not mean it was truly gone. The gods were fewer, the world was changed, but the past was not finished. It never would be. The sky above the new world was no longer lit by the same sun that had once shone over Asgard and Midgard. That sun had perished in Ragnarok, swallowed by the great wolf's skull. But as all things must end, so too must they begin again. A new light rose in the heavens, a child of the old sun, born to take its place. She was Sol's daughter, hidden away before Ragnarok, waiting for her time to come. As she ascended into the sky, her warmth spread over the land, bringing life to the new earth. Under her golden gaze, the world flourished. The rivers that had once run with blood now carried the clear, pure waters of renewal. The forests, untouched by axes, grew tall and mighty, and the air, once thick with smoke and battle cries, was now filled with the sounds of birds, of the rustling wind, of a world untouched by war. But as the new sun cast her light, shadows still lingered. Vidar, Vali, Magni, and Modith, surviving gods, stood upon a high hill, watching as the land stretched before them. Though they had been spared from Ragnarok's destruction, they knew their place in this world was uncertain. The old ways had died with Odin, with Thor, with Freya. The old gods were gone, their era finished. What now? Asked Modi, gripping Mjolnir, feeling the weight of his father's legacy in his hands. Vidar did not answer. He was a god of vengeance, yet there was no vengeance left to seek. Balder, who had returned from Helheim, watched the horizon. He had once been a god of light, of peace, of joy. But what was he now? A relic of a time long past, or the first of something new? And then there were the humans Lif and Yggdrasil. They were small, fragile things, yet within them burned something even the gods could not understand. Hope. They will create a new world, Balder murmured. And we must decide whether we will watch from the shadows or walk beside them. The gods had shaped the world once before, but now the world would shape itself. No longer would the divine dictate the fate of mortals. The new sun rose over an age where man would forge his own path, where stories would be written not by gods, but by the hands of those who walked the land. Yet even in this new dawn, there was an unspoken truth. The cycle was eternal. The old gods had perished, but the new would rise in their place. One day, the world would turn again. The stories would shift. The myths would change. And somewhere, in the deep corners of the world, the first whispers of a new pantheon had already begun. The new world had been born, its lands fresh and unscarred by war. But in the deep places of the earth, in the distant corners of existence, not all had been lost. Some forces had not perished in Ragnarok. Some had simply gone to sleep, waiting for their time to return. Deep beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, something still stirred. Though the great tree had been scorched and battered in the final war, its heart still pulsed with life. And within its vast, unknowable depths, the Norns still whispered. These weavers of Faterd, Verdandi, and Skuldhad, seen Ragnarok come to pass, but they had not perished with it. Fate did not die, it only changed. Their well, Orda Brunner, still flowed with the waters of destiny, though its reflections no longer showed the faces of Odin, Thor, or Loki. The Norns did not guide the new world, but they still watched. They still wove. And they were not the only ones. Beneath the mountains of Svartalfheim, the dwarves still toiled. Their forges had fallen silent during Ragnarok, their hammers stilled as the world above was consumed in fire. But as the land healed, so too did their ambition. They had once crafted Mjolnir, Gungnir, and Draupnir weapons of gods, but now the gods were gone. Who would wield their next creations? Who would be worthy? Far to the north, in the frozen wastes beyond Midgard, Jotunheim remained. Many of the great frost giants had perished in the final battle, but their realm had not crumbled entirely. Some had hidden, some had fled to places beyond even the sight of the Norns. Were they waiting to reclaim what had been lost? Or had they learned that war only led to ruin? And then, there was Helheim. Hel, the ruler of the underworld, had played her part in Ragnarok, sending forth the dead to march alongside Loki. But when the war ended, she had vanished, withdrawing into her shadowed realm. Did she still rule over the lost souls of the old world? Did she watch as Midgard's new humanity grew, knowing that one day they too would find their way to her halls? No one knew for certain, but the echoes of the old world had not truly faded. They had only become whispers. Vidar and Balder, walking through the quiet lands of the reborn Midgard, could feel it. A great stillness lay over the world, but underneath it, something pulsed, waiting, watching, biding its time. The old gods were gone, but power remained. And where there was power, there would one day be those who sought to claim it. The old gods had fallen, their names drifting into legend, their halls reduced to dust. But the world had not been left empty. The cycle of death and rebirth continued, and from the ashes of the past, something new would rise. Would there be new gods? This question weighed upon the minds of the survivors Vidar, Vali, Magni, and Modi. They had seen the destruction of their father's realm, had watched the old pantheon meet its fate. They were gods, yet they were no longer the rulers of Asgard. A new world had dawned, and the mortals who walked it did not yet know them. Were they meant to rule, or merely to watch? The first humans, Lif and Lifthrasir, had no temples, no prayers. Their faith was not placed in gods, but in survival. They built their homes, tilled the land, raised their young not in the shadow of the divine, but in the warmth of the new sun. And yet something stirred. The forces that had shaped the old world had not disappeared. The winds carried whispers. The rivers still hummed with the echoes of Yggdrasil's roots. And in the far reaches of the earth, there were places where power still gathered. Would the gods of this new age rise from among the survivors of Asgard? Would Vidar, Balder, and the sons of Thor take their place as rulers of a new pantheon? Or would the world shape gods of its own beings unlike those who had come before, born from the spirit of this new age? The old gods had ruled through might, prophecy, and fate, their lives bound by the weaving of the Norns. But the threads had been cut, the loom shattered. The gods of the new world, should they come, would be born not of fate, but of choice. Vidar and Balder stood upon the highest peak, looking down at the land stretching before them. They were among the last of their kind, yet they did not know what their place would be. The past was written, but the future remained untouched. For the first time, the gods had no prophecy to follow, only the unknown. Lif and Yggdrasil, the last two humans of the old world, walked upon the fresh soil of the new, shaping their existence one day at a time. Their children spread across Midgard, their homes expanding, their hands molding the land into fields, villages, and paths. They built a world not ruled by gods, but by their own labor. For many years, the gods were silent. The survivors of Asgard Vidar, Vali, Magni, and Modi watched from afar, uncertain of their place in this new order. Once, men had prayed to Odin, to Thor, to Freya, seeking guidance and strength. Now they prayed to nothing, trusting only in their own hands. But as the generations passed, whispers began to stir among the people. They spoke of the thunder that rolled across the sky, as if an unseen hammer still struck against the clouds. They whispered of shadows moving in the forests, of dreams filled with golden halls and towering gods. Some claimed to hear voices in the wind, voices older than time, speaking of a world that once was and could be again. The first to truly listen was a man who wandered alone, drawn by something unseen. One night, as he rested by a great oak, he dreamt of a one-eyed figure cloaked in shadow, watching him from beyond the veil of sleep. When he awoke, he carved the first rune into the bark of the tree, a symbol of knowledge and sacrifice. He did not know why he had done it, only that it felt right. And so, the first temple was not built in stone but in symbols. The people of Midgard did not seek gods in golden halls but in the rustling of leaves, the crash of waves, the flickering of fire. They did not remember the names of Odin, Thor, and Freya, but they felt them in the world around them. And the gods, though distant, listened. Vidar and Balder stood upon a high cliff, watching the distant fires of human villages. The people had not called upon them, had not known their names, yet something within them still sought the divine. "They are finding their way back to us," Balder murmured, watching as another rune was carved into the wood. But Vidar remained silent, gazing at the stars. He did not know if these humans would ever truly understand the gods as they once had. Perhaps the world had changed too much. Perhaps the new order was something beyond even them. But one thing was certain: the connection between gods and men had not been severed completely. It was growing again, slow and unshaped, like the first tree rising from the ashes of a burned forest. And so, the question remained: would the gods return to claim their place among men? Or would mankind create gods of its own? The world had been reborn, but it was not as it once was. The old gods had walked Midgard in ages past, their might shaping the land, their names carved into the very bones of existence. Now, those gods were but echoes, their presence lingering in whispers and dreams. But where the old gods had faded, new beings began to stir. The forests were thick and ancient, untouched by war, and within them, shadows moved that had never moved before. The mountains, long silent, began to hum with voices that had never spoken. The rivers, once the pathways of the gods, shimmered with unseen life. The first to notice were the people of Midgard. The descendants of Lif and Yggdrasil had begun to feel something watching them from the trees, something shifting in the air when the wind blew through the valleys. They told stories of spirits, not the gods of old, but something different, something new. Some were small and playful, appearing in the flickering light of campfires, dancing between the trees, vanishing with the dawn. Others were vast and powerful, their voices like the creaking of old wood, the crashing of waves, the deep rumbling of the mountains. The people gave them names: the Keepers, the Watchers, the Elders. Vidar, walking alone through the forests, felt their presence, but did not know their nature. They were not like the Aesir, nor like the Vanir. They had not fought in Ragnarok, nor had they been shaped by prophecy. They had simply awakened. Balder, watching from afar, wondered if these spirits were the children of the world itself, beings born not from gods, but from the raw life that now pulsed through the land. Would these spirits one day rise as the new gods? Or were they something else entirely, forces beyond worship, beyond legend, simply part of the living world? The humans, unable to explain their presence, did what they had always done. They left offerings at the roots of great trees. They whispered prayers to the rivers before they drank. They carved symbols onto stones, hoping to understand. And the spirits, though silent, listened. A new world had come. The old gods still watched, but they were not alone. Something different was rising in the forgotten places, something that had not existed before. The people of Midgard felt it, and so did the last of the gods. For many years, the world had moved forward without fate's guiding hand. The old prophecies had been fulfilled, their stories burned away with the fall of Asgard. The Norns, the weavers of destiny, had been silent. But the fabric of the world could not remain unwritten forever. It began in whispers, dreams of things yet to come, visions seen in fire and water. The first to notice were the wise among the new humans, those who sat in silence and listened to the wind, those who stared into the flames and saw not just light but meaning. In the deep forests, an elder woman awoke from a dream with words of power upon her lips. Words she did not know yet had always known. She carved runes upon the stones, and though their meanings were lost to time, she understood them in her heart. The world had begun to speak again, and she was its first listener. Across the sea, a young man stood atop a cliff, his eyes drawn to the stars, which flickered as if telling a story only he could see. He felt something shifting in the sky, as though time itself had taken a new course, one that had not been foreseen by the gods of old. And in the high mountains, a child was born with one blind eye, yet she saw further than any other. Her mother whispered that the spirit of Odin must have touched her, but the truth was greater than that. She was the first seer of a new age. The threads of fate, once cut, were being rewoven. Vidar and Balder, watching from the edges of the world, felt the change ripple through existence. Balder, who had once been trapped by fate's cruel hand, wondered if destiny would once again chain gods and men alike. Vidar, ever silent, only watched. Would this new prophecy bring another cycle of war and ruin? Would the new gods, if they ever rose, fall as their predecessors had? Or was the world creating something different, something untouched by the old ways? No one knew, not even the last gods themselves. But the Norns, wherever they were, had begun to weave once more, and prophecy had returned. The world had changed. The old gods had fallen, and a new age had begun. Yet in the quiet places of the world, in the deep forests, the high mountains, and the restless seas, whispers of the past still echoed. Were the old gods truly gone, or did something of them remain? It began with fleeting visions. A traveler, lost in the snow-covered peaks, swore he saw a shadow move through the storm, a one-eyed figure, wrapped in a tattered cloak, watching from afar, before vanishing with the wind. A woman tending her fields heard the distant sound of thunder on a cloudless day, as if some unseen force still wielded the hammer of storms. A fisherman, casting his net into the waters, glimpsed something vast and coiled beneath the waves, too large to be anything of this world. The people of Midgard did not know what to make of these phantoms of the past. Some believed they were simply dreams, fading memories of the world that had burned away. Others whispered that the gods were not truly gone, that death had not claimed them completely. And then there were those who believed in return. Vidar and Balder stood on the cliffs overlooking the new world, their hearts heavy with unspoken thoughts. They too felt at the presence of something just beyond reach. What if they are still here? Balder asked. Not in body, but in spirit? Vidar did not answer, but he turned his gaze to the sky, where the stars flickered like distant torches. If the cycle was eternal, if the world was meant to rise and fall again and again, could the gods truly fade into nothingness? Or were they waiting, hidden between the fabric of existence, for the moment when they would rise once more? The thought sent a chill through the air. Were the gods watching, or were they waiting? And if they were waiting, then what were they waiting for? The people of Midgard continued to live, unaware of the unseen eyes upon them. The new world belonged to them now, but in the forgotten places, in the spaces between dreams and waking life, the ghosts of the old gods still lingered. And one day they might return. The gods had fallen, their halls destroyed, their names reduced to whispers carried on the wind. But not everything had vanished. Scattered across the world, hidden beneath mountains, buried beneath the waves, and lost in the deepest forests, the last remnants of divine power remained. The first to seek them were the wanderers, the ones who still believed in the old gods, the ones who heard the echoes of their voices in their dreams. They searched for artifacts, for weapons, for any trace of what had once been. Some spoke of Mjolnir, Thor's mighty hammer, which had been carried into the final battle and lost in the fires of Ragnarok. Did it still exist, waiting to be claimed? Or had it been reduced to dust? Its power returned to the earth. Others sought Gungnir, Odin's legendary spear, said to have never missed its mark. If it remained hidden in the ruins of the old world, then perhaps the All-Father's wisdom had not been lost entirely. The most daring searched for Draupnir, the golden ring of Odin, which had once spawned endless wealth. If such a treasure still existed, what new king or warrior might find it and claim the favor of the gods? And then there were the most dangerous relics, the ones whispered about in fear. Loki's bindings, the chains that had once held him beneath the earth, had vanished after Ragnarok. Some believed they had been destroyed. Others feared they had simply been undone, waiting for the moment when the trickster might return. Far beneath the mountains of Svartalfheim, the dwarves still toiled. Though the gods were gone, the forge fires had not gone cold. Had they crafted something new, something even greater than what had come before? If so, who would wield such power? Vidar, silent as ever, wandered the new world, watching as men and women sought these lost relics. He knew the truth power never truly dies. If the weapons of the gods still existed, then perhaps so too did their destiny. And if that were true, then the world was not yet finished with the old gods. Not yet. The frost of Jotunheim had long melted away in the fires of Ragnarok. The war between gods and giants had ended, and most of the mighty Jotnar had fallen in battle. Their kings, their warriors, their beasts all had perished, their strength spent in the final clash against the Aesir. Yet not all of them were gone. In the deep north, where the mountains rose like the bones of the earth, there was a place untouched by time, a valley hidden beyond the reach of men, where the last of the frost giants slept. It was said that this giant was unlike the other, not a mindless brute, not a beast of destruction, but something far older, a being who had walked the world before Odin, before Ymir's body had been shaped into Midgard, a creature who had seen the first dawn and who had not fought in Ragnarok because he had seen the last. The people of Midgard whispered of him in fearful voices. The sleeper, they called him, for he had not stirred since the old world fell. Some claimed he was dead, his body frozen beneath layers of ice, a relic of a forgotten time. Others believed he was dreaming, his mind drifting through the threads of fate, waiting for the day when he would wake once more. Vidar, wandering the world in silence, climbed the mountains of the north, searching for truth. He felt the presence before he saw it, a deep, slow pulse beneath the ice, as if the very heart of the land still beat. And there, in the heart of the valley, he found it. A colossal form, covered in layers of ice and stone, its massive hands resting upon the earth, a face barely visible beneath the frost, eyes closed as if lost in a dream. The last of the old giants, Vidar did not speak, did not move closer. He simply watched. Would the giant wake? Would he open his eyes and rise once more, walking the land as he had in the age before gods and men? Or would he remain as he was, a silent monument to a world that had ended? No one knew, but if the giant still dreamed, then perhaps somewhere, deep within that ancient mind, he knew something the rest of the world did not. Something about what was still to come. Though the gods had fallen and the world had been remade, the threads of fate still wove their endless patterns. The Nornzerd, Verdandi, and Skuldhead once sat at the roots of Yggdrasil, weaving the destinies of gods and men alike. But after Ragnarok, they had vanished. Some believed they had perished with the old world. Others whispered that they had simply withdrawn into the shadows, waiting for the next cycle to begin. Yet in the deep places of the world, hidden in stone, water, and air, their knowledge remained. The forgotten runes, carved upon the walls of ancient caves, etched into the bark of the oldest trees, whispered in the rush of rivers. These runes had been left behind, the last remnants of a power beyond gods. They were not spells nor prayers. They were words of truth, fragments of the grand design, untouched by the fires of Ragnarok. The first humans who discovered them did not understand their meaning, but they felt their power. Some saw visions when they touched the symbols, glimpses of things yet to come. Others heard voices, like echoes from another world, guiding them towards something unknown. Vidar, the silent god, followed the whispers of these runes, tracing their scattered remains across the lands. He found them in places where the world still pulsed with hidden energy, beneath waterfalls, in the deepest caves, and upon the ruins of the old world. Each rune told a story, each symbol a key to something lost. But what were they leading to? Balder, standing at the edge of a great lake, ran his fingers over a rune carved into stone. As he did, he felt something stir not within him, but within the world itself. A ripple, as if fate had moved ever so slightly, like a hand turning a page in an unfinished book. If the runes still held meaning, then the story of the world was not yet finished. Had the Norns truly vanished? Or were they still weaving unseen, waiting for the day when the runes would be read once more? And if the runes held the future, what did they foretell? The 9 realms had burned in Ragnarok. Asgard, home of the gods, had crumbled into ruin. Midgard, the world of men, had been reshaped. The great tree Yggdrasil had trembled, its branches scorched, its roots shaken. The balance had been shattered. And yet, in the vastness of existence, there were whispers of places beyond the 9 realms untouched by the war of gods and giants, hidden worlds that had remained in the shadows even as the universe collapsed. The first tales came from wanderers, those who walked the edges of the world, where the known lands met the unknown. They spoke of halls of light, floating beyond the reach of the sun, where beings of neither Aesir nor Vanir still watched over the remnants of creation. Others claimed to have glimpsed a darkened realm, deeper than Helheim, where forgotten spirits drifted, lost between existence and oblivion. Vidar and Baldar, searching for remnants of the past, found strange paths, doorways carved into stone, tunnels that led to places where the air felt different, heavier, as if time itself had slowed. Were these remnants of the old world, or something else entirely? Legends told of Vidblain, the rumored third heaven, where wisdom older than Odin's still lingered. It was said that before the gods, before the giants, before even the shaping of the cosmos, there had been another force, one that had never intervened in the war of gods and chaos. What if it still remained, waiting in its hidden halls? And then there was Ginnungagap, the void, from which all things were born, the nothingness that had existed before the first spark of creation. Some whispered that beyond even the new world, beyond the reach of gods and spirits alike, the great chasm still existed, silent and empty, waiting for something or someone to return. Were the 9 realms truly all there was? Or had the gods, in their war, overlooked something far greater? Something outside the cycle, watching and waiting? Balder placed a hand against the stone archway of an ancient ruin, feeling the faint hum of something beyond his understanding. What was still out there? And more importantly, had it been watching all along? Ragnarok had been the war to end all wars, the final battle that had shattered the world. The Aesir and the Jötnar had clashed. The flames of Muspelheim had consumed the realms, and the dead had risen to claim their vengeance. But even in destruction, not all enemies had fallen. There were those who had not fought not out of fear, but out of patience. Not all who had desired the end had raised a sword. Some had waited, and they were still waiting. Deep in the mountains of Svartalfheim, the dwarves whispered of something stirring in the Darka being older than even the gods. One who had never chosen a side in Ragnarok. One who had watched and remained silent. In the cold reaches beyond the known world, sailors spoke of ships that moved without wind, their hulls black as the void. Some believed they were ghosts, the remnants of the dead who had never reached Helheim. Others feared something worse, that the war was not over. Even in the reborn Midgard, there were places where shadows moved without light, where old evils whispered in the voices of the wind. Vidar and Balder, watching over this new world, knew that something still lurked beyond the veil of sight. The old world had been built on conflict, gods against giants, order against chaos. If the cycle still turned, then war was not over, only paused. And when it began again, who would rise to fight? The gods of old were gone. Would the sons of Thor, the silent Vidar, the reborn Balder, stand against what still lurked in the dark? Or was this war meant for someone else? Something was still out there, and one day it would return. Ragnarok had ended. The great wolf Fenrir had slain Odin, and had in turn been slain by Vidar. The serpent Jormungandr had fallen to Thor, and the mighty steed Sleipnir had carried its last rider. The beasts of war and prophecy had perished with the gods. But one remained, deep in the forgotten places of the world, in the untouched valleys where no mortal had yet stepped. There was something that did not belong, a shadow that moved without sound, a presence that should have perished with the old world. The first to see it was a hunter. He had gone deeper into the forests than any of his kin, seeking prey that had fled the growing villages of men. He did not find deer, nor wolf, nor bear. He found it, a creature unlike anything that had ever walked Midgard. It was neither god nor beast, neither giant nor man. It had no name, for it had never needed one. And as the hunter gazed upon it, the thing turned its gaze upon him, and the world around him shifted. He ran, but he could never unsee what he had seen. The people of Midgard whispered of the last great beast, a thing that should not be. Some claimed it was the remnant of a god who had refused to die. Others feared it was something else, something that had not been bound by the laws of Ragnarok. A force beyond prophecy, beyond fate, beyond the gods themselves. Vidar, walking the quiet lands, felt its presence in the air. Balder, watching from the high cliffs, saw its shadow flicker against the light of the new sun. The old world had been built on cycles, on beginnings and endings. But this creature had survived where it should not have. What was it? And more importantly, why was it waiting? For all the destruction Ragnarok had wrought, the world had been reborn. The 9 realms, though changed, still endured. The gods, though fewer, still walked among the remnants of creation. And yet, there were places where the laws of existence had fractured. The first sign of this was the shattered gates. They were not built by gods or men. They had no origin, no story, no runes to mark their makers. They simply existed, vast and broken, standing where no doors should have been. Scattered across the world, these strange, crumbling portals led to nothing, so it seemed. Some believed they had once been the entrances to the old Asgard, now left as ruins after the final battle. Others claimed they were remnants of realms beyond the 9, places the gods had never ruled, places forgotten by time itself. But a few whispered something even darker, that the gates were not just broken, they had been forced open. Vidar found one deep in the valleys of Midgard, where the air felt thin, where the grass refused to grow. It stood alone, a massive archway of stone, its surface cracked and flickering, as if it had once been a doorway to another world. Balder stood before another, carved into the side of a mountain, its edges glowing faintly, as if something had tried to pass through from the other side. The humans who stumbled upon them spoke of voices that came from nowhere, whispers that slipped between worlds. Some who dared step through found only air and empty land. Others never returned at all. Had the shattered gates been left behind by the gods? Or were they something older, something that had always been there waiting? And if they led to somewhere else, who or what might come through them? The gods of Asgard had fought and fallen in Ragnarok, their fates sealed in prophecy, their lives burned away in the fires of war. But not all had met their end upon the battlefield. Some had vanished. When the final war came, the Aesir and Vanir had stood against their enemies, knowing their doom was certain. But there were whispers of those who had chosen another path, who had seen the destruction coming, and had left before the flames consumed all. Where had they gone? And more importantly, why had they not returned? The first suspicions arose when travelers, wandering the new world, claimed to have seen figures dressed in ancient garb, speaking words of power no mortal should know. They did not linger. They did not explain. They simply watched, then disappeared into the wilds. Some believed Njord, the Vanir god of the sea, had retreated into the depths, taking refuge where no fire could reach. The tides still moved with an unnatural force, as if something greater than nature itself still commanded them. Others whispered that Freya, goddess of love and war, had not perished, but had walked a path beyond the reach of men and gods alike. She had always been tied to the mysterious Vanir, who had never fully belonged to the halls of Asgard. If any god had found a way to escape fate, it would have been her. And what of Höður? The blind god had once been a pawn in Loki's schemes, his hands guided to slay Baldur. He had been cast into the underworld, but when Ragnarok ended, he had been seen again. How had he returned? And where had he truly been? Vidar, wandering the empty lands, felt the presence of something just beyond his grasp. Not the ghosts of fallen gods, not the spirits of the old world, but something else. Somewhere, in the corners of existence, were the gods who had fled Ragnarok still watching? Had they abandoned the world forever? Or were they simply waiting for the right moment to return? And if they did return, would they be the same gods they had once been? The gods had perished, but their wisdom had not vanished with them. Carved into the stones, whispered in the wind, scattered across the reborn world, the remnants of their knowledge still lingered. The unfinished runes. They were not like the ancient inscriptions of the past. These runes were different, not complete spells, not fully formed words. They were half-written, their meanings cut off, as if the hands that had begun to carve them had been stopped before they could finish. Who had left them, and for whom? Vidar found one in the ruins of an old temple, etched into the foundation of a hall long since crumbled. Baldur found another on the bark of an ancient tree, its symbols glowing faintly in the moonlight. Neither could read them. No living soul could. The mortals who discovered these runes did not understand them, but they felt them. When a wanderer traced their fingers along the markings, they saw visions of a time yet to come. When a wise woman whispered their sounds, she heard voices answering in languages she did not know. The runes were a message, but from who? Had they been left by the vanished gods, those who had fled Ragnarok and hidden beyond the reach of fate? Or were they warning signs of something still unwritten, a fate that had not yet come to pass? Perhaps the old cycle had not truly ended. Perhaps the runes were waiting for someone to finish them. The story of the gods had been written, and their fate had been fulfilled. Ragnarok had come and gone, leaving behind a new world, shaped not by the hands of divine beings, but by time itself. Yet, as the last remnants of the old world faded into memory, one question remained. Was it truly the end? Vidar, Baldur, and the sons of Thor walked among the ruins of what had been, searching for answers where none had yet been spoken. They had seen the final battle, had felt the weight of fate pressing down upon them, had watched as their fathers and kin had been consumed by destiny. And yet, the world had not ended. Midgard had survived. The sun had risen again, carried by a new force, unburdened by the past. The whispers of lost gods still lingered in the wind. The runes remained unfinished, as if waiting for another hand to complete their story. The cycle had always turned, from the birth of the first beings in Ginnungagap to the death of the last gods in Ragnarok. But what if the cycle did not end? What if it had simply begun anew? The mortals of Midgard, unaware of the past, built their homes, spoke of new myths, and worshipped new names. The gods of the old world had once risen from chaos to bring order. Now, the world stood in balance once more. But for how long? Vidar, the silent god, watched the horizon. The world was at peace, but he knew that peace never lasted forever. One day, perhaps in an age yet to come, new gods would rise, new battles would be fought, and the wheel of fate would turn once more. For the cycle was endless, and somewhere, beyond the reach of gods and men, the first whispers of the next Ragnarok had already begun. The end, for now. For all the prophecies that had come before, for all the visions woven by the Norns, there was one that had never been spoken, one that had remained hidden even from Odin's sight. The final prophecy. It was said that after Ragnarok, there would be nothing left that fate itself had unraveled, that the gods had played their last role, that the cycle had ended. But as the new world grew, as forgotten runes were found, as the whispers of old powers stirred once more, it became clear. Something had been overlooked. The Norns had vanished, their loom abandoned. But had their work truly been finished? Vidar and Balder felt it a thread of fate, still unspooled. Something that should not exist. Something left unwritten. The mortals of Midgard sensed it too. Seers who had never before spoken of gods now dreamed of a great turning, of forces beyond their understanding preparing to move once more. The hidden gods, the sleeping giant, the shattered gates. The last great beast, were they all pieces of something greater? Had Ragnarok truly been the end? Or was it merely the beginning of a new prophecy, one that had never been foreseen? The gods had ruled by fate, had lived by prophecy. But now, something unknown awaited, something beyond the cycle. And for the first time, even the gods did not know what was coming. And so, dear traveler, our journey comes to an end. The fire burns low, the echoes of the past grow quiet, and the world beyond these stories begins to stir once more. You have walked the paths of gods and giants, seen the rise of empires and the fall of legends, stood in the shadow of Yggdrasil, and watched the flames of Ragnarok consume all. But though this tale has reached its final words, the story itself never truly ends. For the cycle turns ever onward. The gods of old have faded into the mist, but their whispers remain in the crash of the waves against the cliffs, in the roll of thunder across the skies, in the silent stillness of a winter's night. Their stories live on, carried by the wind, written in the stars, waiting for the next voice to speak them once more. Perhaps you too have felt it, the weight of something ancient, the pull of a fate long foretold. Perhaps the names of Odin, Thor, and Loki will linger in your mind long after the last word fades. Perhaps, in the quiet hours of the night, you will hear the distant echo of Gjallarhorn, calling not for war, but for remembrance. And when the world shifts once more, when the runes are rewritten, and new tales rise from the ashes of the old, perhaps you will return to listen, to learn, to walk once more among the gods. For stories such as these are never truly finished. They only wait to be told again. Until we meet again, traveler.